Hi, welcome to the Getty. We're so excited to have all of you here today for our presentation today, an art break on the weird and wonderful world of the Voynich Manuscript. I am Beth Morrison, Senior Curator of Manuscripts here at the Getty, and I'm also the co-curator of the exhibition that this program is paired with. And I'm just going to share my screen so you can have a chance to see that exhibition. It's called Symbols and Signs, Decoding Medieval Manuscripts. It's up here at the Getty through August 10th. And for those of you who can, I really encourage you to come. It has some of our most wonderful manuscripts here at the Getty from the permanent collection on display. It's an exhibition that I co-curated with my colleague Orshoya Mednyansky, and she had the wonderful idea of looking at the medieval world through the idea of codes. Some of you might think of sort of the kind of mysterious manuscript that we're going to be talking about today, but one of the real purposes of this exhibition was to explain to people that basically everything you see in your visual world is a code, whether it's a language like English, an alphabet like the Latin alphabet we use for English, the signs that we have all over. If you think about somebody in the Middle Ages actually looking at an entire sentence written in emojis, they probably would have no idea. But if they looked at a medieval manuscript, they would instantly know, just like we know when we're decoding emojis, because it's part of their cultural atmosphere around them. And so we really wanted to explore that theme and also look at the mysterious codes that can be found in medieval manuscripts, which is a perfect opportunity for me to introduce my partner for today's program, Lisa Fagin Davis.
Hello.
Hi, Lisa. How are you?
Oh, I'm great. I'm so happy to be here. This is really thrilling. I'm always happy to talk about this manuscript, and I'm always happy to talk with you. So it's a wonderful combination of some of my favorite things.
Well, it's great to have Lisa here today. We're going to put her bio into the chat so you can read a little bit more about her. But we are going to try to dig right in. Lisa and I have known each other for probably more years than either of us wants to admit.
That's about right.
We are longtime friends and colleagues, and I have been along with her for a couple of decades here and there in this wonderful and weird and wacky world of the Voynich manuscript. Lisa is one of the world's leading scholarly experts on this manuscript, and so we have a lot in store for you today. So let's just get right to it. Lisa,
yes.
Tell us the basics about this amazing manuscript.
The basics about the Voynich manuscript. Well, the most important thing to know about the Voynich manuscript is that it is a real medieval object. It's not something that is imaginary. It's not a modern hoax. It is, with almost no doubt, an actual medieval object, and it is so unique as a medieval object. So let's just launch right in and look at the contents.
Yeah, so we've got some slides taking you through the various contents, and I think you're all, if you know the Voynich manuscript, you're going to learn more, and if you haven't, you are in for a ride.
It is a ride, that is for sure. So the first part of the manuscript is basically an herbal. So it's plants upon plants upon plants, one plant per page, accompanied by text. And the plants are drawn in a way that suggests they are attempting to draw real plants. They have roots, they have stems, they have leaves, they have flowers, but there has been, for more than 100 years, a lot of debate among people trying to identify what plants these are, because some of them feel almost recognizable and some of them absolutely do not. And if you can imagine, if this is in fact an herbal, what you expect from the text is that it would say, here is the name of the plant, here is how you cultivate it, here is what you can do with it, whether that's medicinal or using it to make pigments or any other function that you might use plants for.
And herbals were quite common in the Middle Ages. So this is totally a kind of normal format for an herbal in the Middle Ages. Like Lisa said, you have one plant on each page. And one thing that I just wanted to direct our viewers to that I think is really interesting is that here the images have the primacy. So you can see that the text is actually written around the stems of the plant. So they drew the picture first, and then they put in the text, which is a little bit unusual in a medieval manuscript, but not for an herbal. That's how they were all done. So then
that's such a great observation. Thank you. All right, next up, the next section of the manuscript are these diagrams that look, well, the one on the left looks an awful lot like the COVID virus, but generally speaking, in this section of the manuscript, we have what appear to be cosmological diagrams. So the one on the right, you can see there's sort of a sun in the middle. There are suns and moons and stars, what looks like maybe could be constellations, but really not easily interpretable. And then following that, if you go on to the next piece there. So next we have a series of 10 pages that have these circular diagrams. And there should be 12, there should be one per zodiac, because right in the middle, we're looking at Pisces. See those two fish. So we've got the zodiac here. This is not a calendar. There are this is where the naked ladies in the baskets who make their appearance throughout the manuscript, this is where they first appear. And there are 30 of them on each of these pages, exactly 30. So it isn't necessarily calendrical, but it definitely has something to do with the zodiac. Whether that's astronomy or astrology is still to be determined.
And Lisa, can I interject a question here? Because I'm sure a lot of our viewers have it. What is up with all the women in baskets?
What is up with the naked ladies in the baskets? And I can't even tell you. I have no idea. Nobody knows what they represent. They're almost all women. There's at least one man, but almost all of them are women. They're almost all nude. They are a little on the zaftig side, as you might say, and many of them appear to be pregnant. And that's an important point, because in the next section of the manuscript, that will become important.
Here we are. And I think this is a good time, Lisa, to talk a little bit about the text and the language that it's written in.
The language, is it a language? We don't know what it is yet. So the manuscript is written using a series of symbols, somewhere between 25 and 30, depending on how you distinguish them, that are totally unique. No one has ever found anything else, any other manuscript written using this set of symbols. I'm avoiding calling it an alphabet because we don't know for sure that it is alphabetic. It could be something, they might be letters, they might be phonemes, they might be numbers. We just don't know yet what the symbols actually represent. But the latest research indicates that it almost certainly is alphabetic, whether it's a code or a transcription of a spoken language or a lost language. We just don't know yet. But the linguists tell me that and the latest linguistic research that you can read is that it does seem to represent a natural human language. We just don't know yet what language it is.
And how. I mean, that's the interesting thing. And we're gonna get into that. But to return to the naked ladies.
The naked ladies.
Here are even more, and they look like they're in hot tubs.
Yeah, this is the best. This is my favorite part of the manuscript. So we actually sort of have two different topics being addressed in this particular opening of the manuscript. We're looking at folio 77 verso on the left, 78 recto on the right. So on the right, we have this there are several leaves, several pages where you have these green pools of water with naked women bathing. And they're connected by these channels or pipes or some kind of something that allows water to flow from one to the next. But on the left, what we're looking at is even more fascinating, because on this page in particular, we see what look like internal organs. So at the top, it looks very much like the female reproductive system, where you have a
Yeah.
uterus in the middle and fallopian tubes and ovaries and
Which is
all of this.
fascinating.
Oh, it is absolutely fascinating.
Because there are manuscripts from this time period that actually show the inner workings of women's bodies.
That's
and
right.
I think we're all dying to know what the text is saying about it, right?
Right. Is it about gynecology? Is it about women's health? Is it about sort of women's secrets, women's medicine, things that women's communities knew about childbirth, about pregnancy? Is that why it's written in a way that most people nobody else could read, because they're trying to keep this information within their community?
Yeah, I love it.
We just don't know yet. We just don't know.
And I think it's really incredible because it really makes sense with the herbal, right? And with the sort of astronomical part,
Yeah.
because all of the movement of the planets and everything was thought to influence health, as well as the herbs you could use to treat it. So it kind of holds together in a way,
Yes.
right?
Yes, it holds together as a scientific compendium.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
And then we have more, right?
Oh, but wait, we're not done yet. Next, we have every page gets crazier. This is so unusual as part of a medieval manuscript. So you can see this big square. It's divided into 6 sections. The bottom left and the bottom center are the main opening of the manuscript. So that's the manuscript itself, and the rest is a fold out. So you open it and then you fold it out and you open it again. So you get this huge diagram with these 9 circles that are connected in different ways and there's minuscule text on all of these going around in circles and in spirals. It's really quite beautiful. And there's actually a really important clue on this page in the upper left segment, in the upper right circle.
Okay.
There is a tiny, tiny little structure, a little fortress or castle, and it has an architectural.
Oh, I see it.
feature.
I see it. I don't know if you can see my arrow, but I'm circling it.
It has what are called swallowtail merlins, a special kind of crenellation at the top that is found primarily in northern Italy and parts of Central Europe. And so that's a really important clue about where the manuscript might have come from.
But of course, we don't know. I mean, to me, this looks like a contemporary artist who has been looking way too long at Hubble Space Telescope images.
It does. Yep.
It has the feeling of like an image of the universe somehow,
Yes,
right?
it does. And in
parallel
fact,
universes or something.
When we talk about early code breaking attempts, which we're going to do pretty soon, that will become important. Absolutely.
It really is just fascinating in its complexity. I don't know anything else like this. In fact, the only thing it makes me feel like I recognize, and I read online that other people have had this thought as well, is that it does remind me of the abstract diagrams we find in Hildegard of Bingen's work, which is interesting because she also invented a language.
That's
and
right.
she also had these sort of visions that she recorded in manuscript form that are very complicated and very abstract. And
right. It looks a lot like some of the Scivias.
Yes. A women's community. It's just kind of interesting.
Yeah, it looks a lot. It is very reminiscent in some ways of the Scivias, and a lot of people have noted that. I don't think there's a direct connection.
No.
But it feels like a similar genre. Definitely.
It does feel like a vision of some kind. We just don't know what it's a vision of.
Right, exactly. All right.
And then there's also other fold outs, right?
Right. So then this page, there are several pages like these that are fold outs, where you have components of plants, leaves, flowers, roots, some of which can be identified as belonging to some of the plants earlier in the manuscript. So it's the root of that plant on folio 14, or it's the leaves from the plant on folio 37. And then you have these sort of vessels along the left margin. And so what this sort of appears to be is maybe some kind of a recipe. So you take this leaf and those roots, and the text tells you what you're supposed to do with them, and you put them in that vessel, and you get something medicinal, maybe some kind of elixir to solve some kind of something. We really don't know.
If only we could read it.
If only we could read it. If only we could read it. And then there's one more section that doesn't have any pictures. It's not as visually interesting. It's just pages and pages of text with a bunch of stars in the margin.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to work with visually in this manuscript. But
and textually, because so many people have been working on it, which brings me to, I think, to our next question that viewers must have. When I started knowing about this manuscript in the late 80s, everyone thought it was a forgery and it was just a made up thing. So I want to turn a little bit to the science that has really helped us narrow in on the fact that this is a real medieval object. So I'm going to go to our next slide to show people some of the science that we have been looking at.
Yes, so this is very exciting. So multispectral imagery is a way of using non-visible light to see things that you cannot see with the human eye. And in medieval manuscripts, we're very fortunate because it is written on parchment. And parchment, when something is erased or scraped off of parchment, the iron-based ink leaves a molecular signature on the parchment that you can't see with the naked eye, but under ultraviolet light, you can sometimes read things that have disappeared or faded. And so this is an example of that. This is an image, a multispectral image of folio 26 recto, and you can see that things appear that you can't necessarily see with the naked eye, whether it's an offset from the page to the left, that's what's in that red box, something, the green showing through the parchment from the other side of the page, that's the blue box, or things that we don't know yet what they are. There's a sort of a blob in that yellow box. And so the multispectral imagery can give us some evidence about the history of the manuscript. But they've also done carbon-14 dating on the parchment, which you can do because carbon-14 tells you when a living thing died, when it stopped growing. And so it tells you when the animals were slaughtered that gave up their skins to make this manuscript. It's calf skin. And so in that case, we have the parchment has been dated quite reliably to the early 1400s. But, so the argument goes, couldn't empty parchment sit around for 500 years and then Mr. Voynich found it and made a manuscript? Sure.
He wouldn't have known that it was 400 years old. And you and I have quite a number of decades of experience between us. I have never seen that much empty parchment anywhere. It would have been used or it would have been destroyed. There's no way that it would have just been like, oh, I happen to find an entire book.
This whole cache of parchment. And of course, there's more than that. It's not just that the parchment is authentic. It's the inks, it's the pigments, it's the sewing, it's the provenance. There's just so much evidence that points towards this being an actual medieval object. We're not talking about something like the Vinland
all the
map
inks and colors
forgery.
And everything are mixed according to medieval recipes. And before this would have been before they knew that you were going to be able to do any of that. And so there's no way that they would have used medieval techniques.
Exactly.
Right? So that's
right.
Really,
of course,
really
they would have used Paris green like the Spanish forger did. Yeah. Exactly. So we have all this scientific evidence that helps us to pinpoint that the manuscript is actually a medieval object. So then what? What do we do next? Well, we try to read it. So this is where the cryptologists and the linguists come in.
Yeah, which is super exciting research.
Yeah, It's extremely cool. So
And
one
so
of the
here,
really
actually, you
interesting
can see
things
more of a
about
blow up of those ladies in their green water hot tub with those tubes coming out that seem to be maybe some sort of heating system, some sort of water delivery system. But what we're looking at here is the actual thoughts about the language.
Right. So there are absolute patterns in the language that suggest that it is in fact not just random gibberish. It's not just nonsense. So, for example, what we're looking at here is this symbol that looks like a 4 and a 0 attached to one another. It always is at the beginning of a word. Always doesn't appear anywhere else.
So it's like
and
a
there
prefix.
are other examples. Right, it's like a prefix, and there are suffixes, and there are rules. There are certain combinations of glyphs that never appear, and some that are extremely common. And so when you want to start doing these analytics, but a computer can't read Voynichese. So that takes us on to the next slide, which tells you what Voynichologists do to transcribe the manuscript in a way that a computer can read. We use something, there are several different transcription alphabets that allow you to take Voynichese, it's called, and type it using ASCII characters. So this is the most commonly used one. It's called the extensible Voynich alphabet. And so using these substitutions, which I should add, have no semantic meaning. So if you hit the next slide or hit forward, and you'll see there. So that first symbol with the 2 loops and the 2 legs is transcribed as a T. That does not mean it is a T. It's just an arbitrary way to transcribe the manuscript so you can then feed it into a computer, and that computer can start doing really sophisticated analytics. And this is where the linguists and the cryptologists come in. So,
and Lisa, I had a question for you. I noticed that you refer to these individual symbols in Voynichese, which I just love. I noticed that you don't refer to them as letters; they're referred to as glyphs. And is that because you think that there's maybe not a one-to-one correspondence, or they may be
it's because
syllables,
I'm trying to be precise. So we don't know for sure that they are letters. So I don't want to call them that. I don't want to give the impression that we know this is an alphabet using letters. So just to be conservative, I tend to say symbols and glyphs, just to not give a false impression.
Because it could be some other way, picture symbols. I mean, we have other languages, like, Egyptian hieroglyphs or Chinese that don't have the same way of forming words.
Right, but the number is so small that it feels alphabetic. It's kind of in the Goldilocks zone for an alphabet. Between 25 and 30. If there were 300 of them, that would be one thing.
Yeah, and that really takes us to this, which is a diagram showing the letter frequency of all the letters in the Latin alphabet. You can see along the bottom, and then it gives you the percentages if you have like sort of a normal book or something. This is what it would come up with.
Right, so this is the English letter frequency table. So like if you had a code that you knew was a one-to-one substitution and you knew you wanted to decode it into English, your first move would be, let's find the most common letter. That's going to be an E.
Right. And maybe you can tell, for viewers who don't know what a substitution code is, maybe you could just briefly describe that.
Yeah, it's a one-to-one substitution. So if you take the letters of the Latin alphabet in English and you scramble them up so that A you write as a T and Q you write as a V, that's a one-to-one substitution.
And you do that throughout an entire text.
Right.
But what you're saying, which makes sense, is if you took that and you're like, why are there so many S's? This doesn't make any sense. And you put it into this and you found that 12% were S's, you would pretty much know that was an E in the English language.
But only if you knew you were decoding into English.
Yes, of course. You have to know that first.
You have to know the target language. And that's one of the biggest problems with Voynichese. We don't know the target language.
Yeah.
So we can do once we have it transcribed using the Voynich, the transcription alphabet, EVA, we can figure out what the letter frequencies are. All right, that's useful. It, the most common is around 10%, the least common less than, nearly zero. And that is also a pattern that you see in natural language, where you have some letters that are very, very common and some that are very rare. So that looks pretty good. If they were the same frequency all the way across, that would be suspicious.
Right. But this helps us indicate that it is a natural language of some sort.
Yep. And then the next test is even more telling. So this is something called Zipf's law, which tells you, and this is the graph for English, and this works for every language, and nobody really knows why. The most common word in a language appears about twice as often as the next one, which is twice as often as the next, and so on. So you get this sort of logarithmic curve. So in English, it's so small, I can't read it. The, of, and, all of those words that we use commonly. Now watch what happens when we do this with the Voynich. Look at that. It's the same shape curve. Now you cannot artificially create a language that does that. So if you look at artificial languages like Elvish, that Tolkien created Elvish with a grammar and etymologies and tried really hard to create a language that felt like a natural language, it does not obey Zipf's law.
Because it's so interesting that it does this, that it's the same curve. And you say that's true for every language.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. And so that is among the strongest pieces of evidence that the Voynich really does encode. If by encode, I mean it's a thing that we cannot read and we need to learn to read it, of actual natural human language. We just don't know yet which language it is. And it could be an extinct language. It could be a medieval version of Czech, or it could be a language that's now a dead language. There are so many languages that have come and gone. There are dialects. And of course you can't. It's not good. Even if it were English, which it's not, it wouldn't be modern English. It would be 15th century English or French, right, or whatever. So right, there's a lot of complexity that has to be taken into account. Now, I am not a cryptologist. I am not a linguist. And that is, so it's really important that you stay in your lane with an object like this. I would never claim to be able to do cryptological or linguistic work. I collaborate with linguists and cryptologists, and they aren't codicologists and paleographers, so they collaborate with me. I am a paleographer and a codicologist, and so that's where I have done the most significant work on this manuscript.
Yeah, which brings us to your particular work, which, as you said, is on what we call paleography.
Paleography, the history of writing. That is my expertise. I am trained to look at a medieval manuscript and tell you, a European, I should say, let me qualify that, a medieval European manuscript, and tell you when and where it was written approximately based on the style of the Latin letters in that manuscript. Now, that is predicated on this understanding that humans are humans. This is not a printed book. It is written by human beings who are fallible and are inconsistent. And so it's those inconsistencies from one scribe to the next that I was trying to zero in on in this work. I was trying to determine how many scribes are there, how many people actually picked up the pen and wrote the manuscript. And I spent several years looking really closely and carefully at the individual symbols and figuring out which are the ones that are the most telling, that are the most consistent on a particular page, and so are different from page to page. And so these are the ones that I landed on, in particular in the middle where I've written N. You can see there are 5 versions of that symbol. They're quite different from one another. And that turns out to be a really good marker for distinguishing between the 5 scribes in the manuscript. And the reason it's important that there are 5 scribes is that that tells us we're talking about a community of practice. We're not talking about one person sort of going off on their own and creating this thing. We're talking about at least 5 people who knew how to write this language and presumably knew what it meant. And that to me is another sign that it is in fact an authentic medieval object. It's not just a modern person, but you've got 5 people who are writing this language in this manuscript. And I find that really thrilling. And I put a QR code here. If you flash it with your phone, it will take you to an article that I wrote a few years ago on this, if you want to dig a little deeper into this question of how many scribes there are. It's in the journal called Manuscript Studies, published by the University of Pennsylvania. So if you flash that QR code, you can learn more.
I thought was really interesting in the blog that you wrote on this. It was also interesting that you noted, I think, that that when people are trying to make up something or writing something that they don't know, there's hesitation marks before they do the letters. And one of the interesting things was they all seem to be natural writers of this language, which again is another indication that not only is it a real language, but 5 people knew it, and therefore it's very unlikely that it's all just made up.
Right, they're writing fluently.
Yeah.
Right, they're not hesitating and copying one and then the other, and then the other. There's a flow. There's a flow to it, and it's quite beautiful. And you can understand why people are so fascinated by it. The more you look at it, and kind of the deeper you go, the more it sort of reaches out to you. And there are, in my inbox right now, I have probably 100 solutions that people have sent me. And since the manuscript was purchased by Mr. Voynich in 1912, eventually he brought it to the United States. And he, since the moment he sort of debuted it publicly in Philadelphia in 1919, or 1921, it just became this craze that people have over the last 100 years have become really obsessed with it. And there are dozens and dozens and dozens of quote unquote solutions to the manuscript. And all of them, unfortunately, so far can be proven to be untrue, because generally speaking, people don't follow the evidence.
Yeah.
And I feel like part of my role in all of this is to speak for the object. This is a real object. It has a real history. It was handled and created by real people, and we can't just make things up that we want to believe. We have to follow the evidence.
So those theories might look something like this.
Indeed. Yes,
and
these are all in the last 10 years.
Yeah. This might be a good moment to pause for a second and talk a little bit about the earliest appearance of this manuscript in the historical record, because the efforts to decipher it have gone all the way back to the 16th or 17th century.
Yeah, so the manuscript is said to have been purchased by Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II in the early 1600s, but we really don't know for sure that he ever really owned it. That could be a myth, but it could be true. There is a little evidence that it could be true. But what we do know is that it was, and the Rudolph II's court was in Prague, and in the first half of the 1600s, it passed through 3 hands. It went from a man named Jacobus Tanapius to Georg Barasch to Johannes Marcus Marci, and all three of them were sort of natural philosophers, alchemists, people who were kind of interested in the secrets of the natural world. And we know that all of them were interested in the manuscript. Somebody left, and I believe that it was, in fact, Marcus Marci, who left some notes on the very first page of what looks like a decryption attempt, only visible under ultraviolet light. If you go to my blog, The Manuscript Road Trip, you can read all about it. But then from Marci, he sent it as a gift to Athanasius Kircher, a Jesuit scholar in Rome in 1655, sorry. And so the manuscript went to Rome, and it was in the Jesuit library until 1912 when Voynich bought it. And we don't really know if Kircher was really interested in it. Did he spend a lot of time? He had written a book on hieroglyphics, which is why Marcus Marci thought Kircher was the one to be able to do it. And then so once Voynich gets it, he immediately finds a scholar at the University of Pennsylvania named William Newbold, who I think is our next slide, who decides, because Newbold was a scholar of Roger Bacon, and he fell into the Voynich trap, which is, I'm really interested in Roger Bacon, therefore the manuscript must be by Roger Bacon. That people see themselves in it because it is such a mysterious object that you can reflect anything you want on it. And so William Newbold made this announcement to the world that it was, in fact, a manuscript of Roger Bacon. Roger Bacon was living in the 13th century. He's 200 years too early for them to actually be the author of the Voynich manuscript. And
because of the dating of the parchment.
Right, which we know now. And so Roger Bacon literally could not have been the author of the manuscript. And Newbold's theory, his argument is nonsense. And he talks about minuscule letters and how Bacon must have invented the telescope, and he invented the microscope, and it's going to change the history. And so on the next slide, you can see the very first breathless media coverage of the Voynich manuscript. This article on the left, a Cinderella in parchment, and with a picture of depiction of Roger Bacon. Newbold is totally wrong. He has been discredited. But all through the 20th century, the manuscript was studied by cryptographers and cryptologists like William and Elizabeth Friedman that we're looking at here, who were the top US cryptologists. And they spent decades working on the manuscript and never really got anywhere. And this is a moment when I can drop a little bombshell, which is that my work on the manuscript, on the paleography, if you go and you read the article, you'll see that I'm making the case that the manuscript is misbound because of the way the scribal work is organized. The manuscript is almost certainly bound out of order. And I've been doing some deep analytical work with a computer scientist in Malta named Colin Layfield at the University of Malta. And we're going to be publishing these results. We've got to get through peer review, so I can't say too much. But we have made, I think, a really strong case, not only that the manuscript is misbound, but for making suggestions about how to put it back in the right order. You can't possibly read it if it's out of order. So we've got to put the manuscript back in the right order before we can actually interpret it. So that's what
maybe they could re-release the facsimile, Lisa, and once you reorder it,
exactly,
the people could actually experience what it was actually
exactly.
Like.
Yes.
And people continue, as yourself, to do this.
Yep.
We just have one sample here, which is the main Voynich manuscript website where you can go get all sorts of information.
So this is a website maintained by Renee Zandbergen, who is one of the world experts on the manuscript, and it's always being updated. It has all the latest work. It has everything about the history, all of the decoding, everything you ever wanted to know. It's very encyclopedic and very, very reliable. So I very much recommend this website, voynich.nu by Renee Zandbergen. And then this is a conference that was sponsored by the University of Malta and this interdisciplinary team that I'm collaborating with that happened back in 2022. And all of the proceedings from the conference are online, and it's some of the latest work on the manuscripts, linguistic, art historical, paleography, decoding, everything. We covered a lot of topics. So again, you can flash that QR code and see some of the very latest peer-reviewed work on the manuscript.
So there are scholars all over the world, like you mentioned, Malta and all these other places that are getting together and trying to solve this mystery. Now, it brings me to the interesting question, Lisa. Do you think that this is going, like the Voynich cheese is going to be solved?
Oh, I hope so. I very much want it to be. And I do think it will be. And I really do think that figuring out the original order of the leaves will be a big breakthrough for linguists and cryptologists. And so I'm hopeful that I can help with that in the current work that I'm doing. I do think that we will figure it out at some point. AI is not the answer. Don't ask me about AI. AI is dumb. AI is not intelligent. AI is just a tool. It only does what we tell it to do. AI cannot read the Voynich manuscript, so don't try. Google Translate cannot read the Voynich manuscript. Neither of those techniques is going to
work.
Yes, that is
I love it.
Not the direction to go.
And why don't we spend our last few minutes talking about some of our favorite interpretations of the Voynich that people have. We're going to run through these slides really quick because we want to have some time for questions at the end.
So there is a whole genre of fiction that where the Voynich manuscript is the thing that moves the plot along. And I've put Philodamo's The Medievalist here because it's my current favorite contribution to that genre. It's called The Medievalist, and it's actually set at Yale in the modern era, but the Voynich is the central figure. Highly recommend it. It's quite fabulous. But you'll see this is my own little Voynich collection. It's some sort of mixing fiction and nonfiction, but you'll see there's an Indiana Jones novel. There's an Avengers comic book where the Avengers are called to New Haven because a criminal has stolen the Voynich manuscript. That's canon. That's canon. There's so many of them. They're really, and some of them are terrible and some of them are quite wonderful.
But it's not just fiction, right?
No,
it is not. This object appears everywhere.
It's everywhere. So in the bottom right is the RuneScape online video game. My son found this when he was a teenager playing RuneScape. He said, "Mom, isn't that the Voynich manuscript?" And there it is in the Archaeology Center in RuneScape. In the middle is a board game, a role-playing tabletop game that's in development called Codex, where you're a rare book dealer and you have to run around the world trying to find the missing pages of the manuscript before your competitors do. And I'm sort of helping in the development of that. And then on the left is a magnificent science fiction story by Harry Turtledove called Manuscript Tradition. And I urge everyone to just Google Turtledove and then Manuscript Tradition. It's open access, available online. It's a really beautiful, wonderful, wonderful story. And then the next slide is the librarian curse of the Judas Chalice, where at the very beginning of the movie, the Voynich has nothing to do with the plot, but at the very beginning, Noah Wiley's character returns from wherever adventure he's been on, I think he had to find, I don't know what, and his handler appears to him and says, "Yale sent the Voynich manuscript. They want it decoded by Monday." And he says, "Well, I can't do that. I've got a date tonight." And then they go on to the rest of the thing. And then on the left is a panel, some panels from the Avengers comic book, where you can literally see the Beinecke Library in the top panel there. It's really great.
Which is fabulous. And then we have fine arts too.
The very last one. So this is so beautiful. This is an artist named Carrie Rappaport, and she creates Voynich-inspired art. The one on the left is based on folio. I think that's 2 verso, and maybe that's one verso. And it's I bought it. It's hanging on the wall of my living room. It's really quite it's quite a beautiful piece. And she has quite a lot of them, actually. If you Google her, you'll find her Voynich inspired art. But there's pieces of music that have been inspired by it, fiction, nonfiction, art. It really is a manuscript that catches the imagination in really lovely ways.
It's a manuscript for the masses.
It is. It
and
is.
here we have our final QR code for those who want to learn more about responsible and reliable Voynich manuscript resources. And I'm very happy to announce that Lisa Fagin Davis herself is going to be contributing to the sort of public eye of the Voynich manuscript, in that she is working on a book for the Getty. So why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about that?
So I am working with a friend of mine from college named Carolyn Sanami de Cristofano, who is an award-winning children's STEM author. And she and I are writing a young adult nonfiction book about the Voynich manuscript that the Getty will be publishing. We're so thrilled to be working with the Getty. The book will come out hopefully in a year and a half or so. And the point of the book is to teach young people about the importance of evidence-based research and how you can take an object that's so unusual and so mysterious and actually learn things, real things about it, by following the evidence. That's the goal. And that's the point of this QR code too, is if you just Google the Voynich manuscript, you're going to go down some weird rabbit holes. And if you want responsible, reliable places to start your Voynich journey, this QR code is the place to start.
Well, thanks. And we have some time for questions. And I see that we have quite a number in our Q&A thing. So thank you very much, first of all, Lisa. And thank you also to Greg Sandoval and the AV team, who has been making sure that all of this is working and got set up today. So thanks so much to them and their team. So it looks like our first question is, Lisa, do you feel the plants were deliberately drawn in such a way that they are difficult to identify, or was the artist not competent, knowledgeable enough, or were they drawn in a way that would have been understandable to people in the 15th century?
That's a really good question. And you go back and forth, right? Sometimes you look at them and you think, oh, that looks really realistic. And sometimes you think, okay, there's no such plant that looks like that. The roots are squares or they have little faces in them. And sometimes it appears that the artists, I think there were at least 2 artists doing the plants, were really terrible artists. They were just not very good. And does that mean they weren't trying to draw something real and they did it badly? Or are they fantastical imaginary plants? There's no way to know until we can actually read the text.
Another question. So far, it seems like only scholars of Western European manuscript traditions have studied the Voynich manuscript. Are there scholars who focus on Hebrew, Arabic, Byzantine, Coptic manuscripts tradition who have weighed in?
Sure. Yeah, no, there definitely are. I mean, for one thing, all of those languages have been posited as source languages and dismissed. The manuscript is quite clearly in a Western tradition. It's not Chinese, it's not in Syriac, it's not in Ethiopic, it's not Mesoamerican. It is very definitely seated in the Western European tradition. In terms of its structure and the illustrative content and its history, all firmly place it in Western Europe, probably Central Europe. And so there really isn't anything about the manuscript that points to a non-Western tradition. I mean, the zodiac is the Western zodiac, for one thing.
Yeah. Here's a question that I know you'll like because you get to talk about paleography. Woo! Are the differences in the actual script per the various scribes? Or, sorry, it keeps moving. Is it possible that the reason these symbols or glyphs look different is due to the mechanical aspect of the quill? Each quill would be slightly different.
Sure, that's absolutely right. And it is my opinion right? This is an opinion. This is not a fact. Paleography is subjective. It's based on my knowledge, my expertise, my experience. I feel very confident in the determinations that I have made. And by looking and imagining how you are moving the quill and how you are writing, the issue is that the same person will never write the same letter twice. They're humans. We're all humans. We're infallible. But the way that you move the quill and write the letter is going to be consistent. The way you write, Beth, the way you write the letter G is the way you write the letter G, even if sometimes they don't all look the same, but the sequence in which you write it and the way you move your pen is going to be consistent. And so that's how I made these determinations. But distinguishing one scribe from another in general, it can be really hard, especially if you're dealing with a really professionalized group, which this is not, I should say. Yeah.
It's a little like handwriting analysis today.
A fancy Getty manuscript in a beautiful Gothic script, it could be really difficult to tell one scribe from another.
Yeah. Here's an interesting question. Can you rule out that the community was copying an ancient document that they could not read?
Sure. That's absolutely a possibility. I tend to favor the possibilities that are most likely over those that are least likely. It's all a bell curve, right? It's all a bell curve of possibility. There are things that are really likely at one end, in the middle, and then there are the least likely over there and least likely over there. It is absolutely possible that this is a copy of an earlier manuscript. Absolutely possible, but we will never know.
Unless we can decode it.
Unless we can read it. And it says so, right? There's just no way to know. Or we happen to find an older manuscript that uses Voynichese.
Right.
We have
a couple of questions about how the Voynich manuscript ended up at Yale.
Okay, that's a great question. So Voynich has the manuscript. It's 1912. He spends the rest of his life, he died in 1931, he spends the rest of his life trying to sell it, takes it all over the country on a big tour, trying to hawk this manuscript and get $100,000 for it, which would have been an absolutely shocking amount of money back then. Can't sell it. He dies. He leaves it to his wife, Ethel. Ethel outlives him by 30 years. She can't sell it either. The business goes bankrupt, his rare book business. She has to sell off the furniture. They vacate the space, sell the stock until all they've got left is the Voynich manuscript in a safe. And eventually, when Ethel dies, she leaves it to her assistant, Anne Nill, as a bequest. And Anne can't sell it either. And then finally, she sells it for only $24,500 to Hans P. Krauss, who you know very well, a book dealer in New York. And Krauss has it from 1962 to 1969, and he can't sell it either. He tries very hard. Everyone wants to look at it, but nobody wants to buy it because they can't prove it's real. Nobody knows where it came from, how old Voynich was very cagey about where he got it. And so Krauss can't sell it. And then finally in 1969, he decides to give it to Yale so that it can be freely studied. And so it has been at Yale since 1969 under the shelf mark MS 408.
And a related question is about the binding that is currently on the manuscript and whether it can tell us anything.
It can. I just did a big thread on Blue Sky this morning about the binding. The binding can tell us a lot. It is in an early modern limp vellum binding from the 18th or 19th century that the Jesuits put on it. They rebound it. But if we follow the evidence backwards, we can see there was an earlier binding, wooden boards with leather turn-ins, which is what you would expect in the 15th century, split cord sewing stations, exactly what you would expect. So all we can tell from the binding is that there was an earlier binding and there is now a limp vellum binding. But unfortunately, there's really not much else we can say.
But we kind of have an idea of when the limp vellum binding dates to, correct?
Yeah, so it looks very much like other books that were bound by the Jesuit community in Rome.
Okay. Here's an interesting one. How do these drawings of the women and potentially internal organs line up historically with what was known about the inner workings of bodies at the time in science?
Quite well. People were definitely doing dissections. We're in the 15th century here. We're heading into the Renaissance. There's a big scientific community. There are people who are really interested in how the human body works. So we have, they are fantastical versions of internal organs, but they are totally consistent with someone who had opened up a human body and knew what the female reproductive system looked like.
And, sort of my follow-up question myself to that is that you and I have talked in the past about what your favorite theory of why the manuscript was made relating to women. I think that would be interesting for people to hear.
Well, I'm happy to tell everyone, and I'm breaking all my own rules because this is what I really want it to be. Not necessarily what it is, and I can't say that there's absolute evidence, but I will tell you what I really hope it turns out to be, which is a book made by a community of women recording their women's knowledge about plants, about the stars, about women's bodies, about reproduction, gynecology, and recording it for other generations of women. That's what I really want it to be. We won't know. Who knows? We're not going to know until we can read it. But in my head, that's how I think of it.
And
I was actually with the manuscript 2 days ago. I was in New Haven looking at the manuscript with my friend Claire Bowen, who's a linguist at Yale. We were looking at it and we both realized that I always refer to it as she. You probably do that. You anthropomorphize your manuscripts.
Of course.
No, you don't. I know you do. And I refer to it as she. And I hadn't occurred to me until Claire pointed that out, but I do think of it.
I think it's pretty natural with the imagery that's in there. The women in the baskets and the hot tubs, if only we could read the text, we could really figure out what's going on.
Exactly.
We had another question.
Yes.
About what folio your shirt is.
Oh, yes. It's 14 recto. Verso, 14 verso, I think.
And why did you pick that particular one to have a t-shirt made from?
Oh, I didn't have it made. I bought it.
Oh.
It came this way. I bought it on Redbubble. If you go on Redbubble, there's a whole Voynich line. You can get anything. Thank you for noticing. Hold on. I have here a really fabulous facsimile of the manuscript, so I can double check, but I'm pretty sure, I think it's 14 something.
But that also gives viewers a bit of a sense of how big it is, because I think a lot of people think it's, quite large, but it really, and that gives us information too, Lisa, right? About what it was used for.
Yeah, this is the actual size. It's about the size of an 8x10 sheet of paper. It's small and it is portable. It's a portable book. It's full of stains and tears and it's filthy. This is not a fancy book designed to be displayed and carefully cared for. This is a book that somebody used, that they flipped through, that they carried around with them. They spilled wine on it and water, and there's wax, and it's a mess. But that's because it was a book that somebody used, which also tells you something, that somebody at least knew what it was and what to do with it. We will get there someday. I'm an optimist at heart, and I'm a believer that we'll get there. And then
I think you will play an important role in getting there.
Well, I hope. We'll see. I've got amazing colleagues who I'm collaborating with, scientists, linguists, computer scientists, AI pattern recognition people. I've got all sorts of, I'm working on several different angles right now with a lot of really smart people, and it's really exciting. So stay tuned.
Well, we have a lot of open questions that we're sorry we don't have a chance to get to today, because I see that we're drawing to the end of our time. But I wanted to encourage everyone, I think in the chat somewhere is the actual website where you can go and look at the Voynich manuscript, look at some of these. They have a great website where you can blow things up and really look at them in detail. Look at Lisa's blogs, which are full of information. And we will also be looking forward very much to, I'm looking forward to working with her on this book for the Getty. So we can't wait. We don't have an exact date when that's going to come out, but I will end with the last question that I saw in there that caught my eye, which is the Getty ever going to borrow this manuscript to put it on display? And I'm going to have to end with a mystery, just like the Voynich. We don't
Probably
know.
not. It doesn't get out to play very often. It doesn't leave New Haven very often. It's extremely fragile, for one thing. I suspect that the lawyers and the curators and the conservators would find that a difficult thing to pull off.
Maybe if it was ever solved, we could do
we could
a
take it on a big world tour.
showy exhibition.
Exactly.
But in the meantime,
so much for coming, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa. This has been amazing. And thank you to all of you. Please do come out to see the actual exhibition, Decoding Manuscripts at the Getty. Go to see the Voynich at Yale. Just make manuscripts part of your lives.
Absolutely. They're everywhere. They're everywhere. Thanks, everyone.